progress on the goal? How am I doing? That's the sort of mid-cycle check-in, which we've called a formative assessment or evaluation. Then the last step, the summative evaluation, is at the end of the year, or in some cases 2 years. I just don't want to bore you with the details of that, but at the end of the cycle, which is 1 year for new teachers or struggling teachers, it's 2 years for proficient educators. You get a summative evaluation where you're rated on the 4 standards, again using the rubric, and where you look at where the evaluator looks at how you do on the goals, and then takes the information from rating on the standards plus the goals to come up with a summative assessment. Is this the work this year been exemplary, proficient? Does it need improvement, or is it unsatisfactory? So that's the core cycle. I want to point out that over here on the implementation of the plan about educators collecting evidence, and it's one of your questions. Eventually, educators will need to be evaluated in part on data from student perception surveys. The regulations require that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, within 18 months, by June of, not 12, but 13, by June of 2013, the department will provide guidance and direction for you for how to do that. For example, it's not clear that that's going to be useful and appropriate for kindergarten and first graders. Right. But there's emerging research that says it's really useful for upper elementary, like 5th grade, middle school, and high school students. There's a lot of research that's going on right now about specific kinds of questions to ask, conditions under which to ask the questions, that the kids' answers to those questions are really very tightly linked to how much kids are actually learning. So it isn't just about, do I like my teacher? You don't ask a question, do I like my teacher? You ask some questions about things like, when I'm confused about something, I can get help from my teacher. So there are very specific kinds of questions that are being tested out in some national research that help give a good picture, not the only piece of evidence, but useful evidence that will help the educator and his or her evaluator make some sense of the work. So eventually, student data will be used for most educators, and for administrators, data from staff, feedback from staff, from the teachers and staff in the building will be used as part of the evidence. And again, the department has until June 2013 to really study the research and come back to districts with some really good guidance and resources to use to do that well. So nobody has to do it until the department gets that guidance and resources and direction together. And the department will be, again, putting together a group of folks to help do that. The department's not going to sit off in one corner and do that by ourselves. Right? We're going to set up a process that involves stakeholders in developing that guidance. This question about how does student learning data count in the evaluation? What I've been talking about so far is the left part of this grid. The left side is the summative rating, that rating of exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. That comes from looking at the rubric and the performance on the 4 standards and how did the kindergarten teacher do on her goals. So you get a rating. Separate from that, educators will get a rating down here on their impact on student learning. So I think, Jed, this is, you mentioned this, and I think Glenn mentioned this. Every educator will get a rating. What was their impact on student learning? So I'm the kindergarten teacher. Keep in mind, I'm again, the kindergarten teacher. I have to get a rating from my evaluator. Was my impact on student learning moderate? Was it high? Was it low? And that rating needs to be based on trends, in other words, more than 1 year of data, and patterns. more than one kind of assessment, more than one assessment. So that's trends and patterns. So it can't be just, couldn't be for a kindergarten teacher MCAS anyway, why not? There is no MCAS for kindergarten teachers, right? So it can't be anything about MCAS for kindergarten teachers. It also can't be a single test, like a readiness test for reading. It's got to be more than one measure, that's what the patterns means. And trends, it's got to be more than 1 year. If it's a principal or a teacher who has students that they're responsible for who do have MCAS and for whom there are growth scores, those MCAS growth scores have to count. How many of you know about this MCAS student growth percentile? Okay. I've got a couple slides on that, which I may come back to if I'm not taking too much time, but you tell me. But MCAS growth is not the same thing as the MCAS CPI, or Composite Proficiency Index, that you see that judges whether a school has made adequate yearly progress. It's not the same thing. The student growth percentile is a way of looking at a youngster's score from 1 year to the next, and how did they grow, how did that kid grow compared to other kids who had similar scores in the past. So it is what Massachusetts has as a value-added measure. So I walk in, I'm a 5th grade, I'm a middle school principal. Let's shift to, I'm a middle school principal. And my middle school has 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. The 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders all have student growth percentile scores if they've taken MCAS twice. And the scores they have are between 1 and 100. Because the growth tells them, if I got a 50, if I got a 50, it means that half the kids who had a similar history to me on MCAS did better than me the next year. Half did worse. That's what a percentile is, right? So a 50 is smack in the middle. So if I was judging, if I was giving the middle school principal a rating on student learning of low, moderate, or high, and I was just using MCAS growth, which I can't, I have to use some other things, but if I was just using MCAS growth, what rating would the middle school principal get? If every kid in the school had a student growth percentile of 50.
What's the question?
If every kid in the school had a student growth percentile score of 50,
Means that half the people.
means half the students in the state did better, and half did worse. So what would my rating be?
It depends.
Probably moderate.
But it depends.
Yep, it
It
depends.
depends on so many other factors. If you're in a school, in an environment, in a town that has high crime rate, high unemployment, single parents, poor health care, if they did 50 as well as the average school, that might be great.
Right.
If they're in a privileged community
Yep.
that has everything else going for them, they got a 50, that may be unsatisfactory.
No, actually, that isn't how the student growth percentile works. So I will go into the student growth percentile a little bit. Let me come back. Okay. But I want to make sure that we sort of understand that, because the student growth percentile does, under the regulations, have to be used as one of the measures in determining the educator's impact on student learning. So I want to make sure that we understand that. Okay. So I'll come back to that one. But I want to just explain how it fits in here. So let's say I'm a middle school principal. MCAS student growth percentile scores for all my kids in the school were about 50. And there was another test, another way of assessing that I counted. My impact would be moderate. So the big middle is going to be a lot of people moderate. There'll be some principals whose scores are much higher, consistently higher, more than 1 year, more than one measure, where they keep knocking it out of the park. Really great MCAS growth scores, really great assessment growth in other areas. That administrator could get a rating of high. There may be educators, principals, and I'm going to show you one in a minute, who consistently is getting really low scores. Those administrators may be rated low in terms of their. So what Glenn was talking about of this big challenge of figuring out how do we find appropriate measures, multiple measures, over more than 1 year that can apply to the kindergarten teacher, the 7th grade teacher, the 10th grade teacher, the art teacher. That's a big challenge. And the department, the regulations recognize that as a big challenge. So the department has the responsibility by June of this school year of putting out guidance for local school committees and school districts about ways to do that and resources to use to do that, ways to do it. And then starting in this next summer, districts will go to work on that, figuring out then how should it work for us here in Greenfield or Frontier. But the department will provide guidance in June, and we've got a group of people working on that right now, because it's not a simple question. It's absolutely not a simple question, and we need to figure out ways that it will be done fairly. But I want to show you what's important, because you've all read things, I'm sure, about educator evaluation and what's going on nationally. I want to show you what the regulations do that are very different than what a lot of other states have done. So here, this rating of impact on student learning is a separate rating from the rating on performance that's on the left. Two different ratings. They combine on the grid to define what kind of plan, what kind of educator plan the educator has. So you can't, on the basis of a rating on impact on student learning, get fired. It's not possible under this scenario. If you have a low rating of impact on student learning, you see where you are on the grid? And you have an unsatisfactory rating, you're on an improvement plan. That's a plan of up to a year where you got to improve or you got to get out. The same thing happens if you're rated unsatisfactory, even if you have high or moderate. So the rating does not control your fate. It's an indication. It's an indication, potentially, of a problem. And here's, up here in the light green grid, is where the regulations focus attention. If you're an educator who's been rated, let's say our kindergarten teacher, exemplary or proficient, but the trends and patterns about student learning show low growth, that's a puzzle. How is that possible? That the kindergarten teacher's practice has been described as proficient or exemplary, but over 2 years and multiple assessments, their impact on student learning was shown as low. It's a puzzle. And the puzzle means that instead of having a 2-year plan for your development, it's a 1-year plan. And it's focused on trying to figure out how can that be. Is it that the assessments all stink? And they're just not good measures of what the important stuff that's going on in the classroom? Or is it that the principal of the school doesn't have very high standards and or is missing something really important that's a problem that kindergarten teacher is doing in a classroom, in which case the rating of proficient or exemplary may be inflated, may be too high. But our system doesn't presume to know the answer before we look. So I think, I said to Paul, before this started, that I think we have found a way in our work, in our regulations, that balance professional judgment and data about student learning in a way that gets people to ask questions and dig deeper rather than make snap judgments about schools or kids.